Well, I think I will read that first paragraph. Everyone can see that? Great. Love the Lord with thy heart and soul, even him that made thee, and gave thee and all things in heaven and earth a being. Still wait for the knowledge of him in thyself. He is not far from thee, but near unto thee, and unto all that call upon him in an upright heart. And do thou inquire of thy dear mother, she will inform thee. She knows him and the way to life and peace, and hearken unto her instruction. The last time we read this, I was really curious about the word upright heart. And at first glance, it seemed as though he was saying one had to be upright, righteous. But that's not how I understand how Christ or God necessarily comes to us. It's more like the sinner and the person who needs healing that he'll come to. So maybe it's more just that heart, our hearts are beginning to orient themselves to try to, like a plant, trying to find the light. Not there yet, but with that yearning.
So upright is tied to King James. And so I posted a Strong's word in the chat.
I almost hear Francis Howgill saying to Abigail, turn to your mother. She has an upright heart. He doesn't quite say that, but the fact that he goes from a sentence ending in an upright heart to inquire of your dear mother sort of implies that.
I think that an upright heart suggests the alternative that we're all compelled to deal with, which is self-will or self-service, and the temptations that we all encounter to serve the self and the ego. And the upright heart suggests another incentive that we have also, in addition to the natural incentive to look out for ourselves and our benefits and advantage. And that alternative incentive is justice and truth, to act according to that standard, rather than the standard of what benefits me is right. Those two are often in conflict, and which one we're going to pay attention to is what will either move us toward receiving Christ or move us away from receiving Christ. And I think he's underscoring that what Abigail and what we all need to do is to prefer the standard of truth to self will. And that's the qualification that Howgill is putting upon this calling upon God, is that we need to be oriented towards truth and justice and what is right, rather than oriented to what will provide us advantage or power or any of the other idols. It brings to mind the line in John 4, the Lord our God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. That's the kind of worship that God requires of us, wants of us. It's that orientation towards truth that purifies us, makes us upright.
Are there others who would like to add something, or shall we move on? Perhaps someone would like to read the next paragraph.
I can do that.
Thank you.
It's a spirit, a pure spirit of light, life, and power. He it is that searches the heart and shows thee when thou dost evil, or thinkest evil, or speakest evil, and shows unto men and women their thoughts. That which shows the evil is good, and that which shows a lie is truth. This is within, take heed to it. This is called God's Spirit in the Scriptures. Believe in it, love it, and it will quicken thy heart to good, and it will subject the evil, and will subject the evil. Here is thy teacher near thee. Love it, and if thou act contrary to it, it will condemn thee. Therefore take heed unto this Spirit of truth, and it will enlighten and enliven thee, and it will open thy understanding, and give thee to know what God is, and to do that which is good and acceptable in his sight. This Spirit never errs, but leads out of all error into all truth.
This paragraph makes me feel God's love, even though it talks about condemnation and the word evil is repeated 3 times. This is a God that wants to quicken my heart, that wants to enlighten and enliven me, that wants to open me and to do what is good and acceptable. It's a, I don't know, it's kind of like this makes my heart skip with joy instead of feeling fear and anxiety.
My experience of it is in contrasts like this, when I'm talking to someone and my words say one thing and my tone of voice says another, or just and the other way around. When I've experienced it recently in listening to others, and somebody's speaking of love or oneness, and yet their body language and their tone of voice uh, is speaking something else. When there's a contradiction or a dissonance, that's one way the spirit clearly speaks to me, and it leaves a question mark. This part says one thing, this part says another. Where is the truth? And often it's with the tone of voice and the body language, not the words. Someone speaking of the joy of the Lord, or but yet not being joyful and being depressed or seems negative. That's one way I see that. And it's probably meant for oneself more than for others, but it does help with discernment.
Yeah, I think that last thing that you said, Autumn, is very important. I sometimes notice in myself that it's very easy to see other people's sin. And I also recognize that this tendency is a way of clearing myself by saying, oh, because I can see sin, that means I'm good. But no, that doesn't work that way. If we're seeing and focused on another's sin, we are likely sinning ourselves. There is a clarifying or a purifying that needs to happen when we become interested or focused on another's sin. And I notice in myself that occurs when I can love the person who is clearly perverse. Um, and that is the purifying love of God. And it's a very difficult temptation because the world is sinful and it's everywhere. But the Christian is called to do something other than see sin in others. What we're called to do is to receive God's love so powerfully that we no longer feel condemning of another's sin. But feel the love that regrets that sin is so powerful that it can mess us up, and it certainly can mess up what we see in the world. So, I mean, it's a tremendously difficult task to make that transition from focusing on others' sins to realizing that that activity is our own sin that we ourselves must overcome.
What you just shared, Pat, um, got me pondering whether the flip side might have some truth in it of um, when I'm noticing and drawn to the goodness, the love, the virtue I see in someone, uh, and drawn to the source of that goodness, uh, whether there might be, that might be something God wants me to profit from, to steer me in a positive direction.
I think it's always encouraging when you see a love of justice and righteousness and truth in another. That's an encouraging thing. I've just thought of the verse that says very concisely what I was trying to say earlier. And that is, let's see, how does it go? Um, oh, um, if thou wouldst remove thou seest the speck in thy brother's eye, but fail to see the log in one's own. And he says, first remove the log from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's.
this paragraph that we just read is sort of in a way, the conclusion of this argument or statement that Howgill was making to his daughter that she began a page or so before when he said, "My counsel unto thee is," and he talks to her about seeking and loving God with all her heart and soul, and understanding that the Spirit that is within her can reveal everything. And it seems to me it's very much in keeping with what Jesus was telling his disciples, especially in the what we call the final I forget when I'm losing my the word, the final discourses that appears in John. Jesus does in another part of the gospel, he says that the very first commandment is that you're to love God with all your heart and all your soul, so on and so forth. And then when he's in the final discourses, after he explains to him that he's leaving him and he's sending another in his place, the Spirit of truth, which will do all the things basically that Howgill lays out here. And I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly because I haven't read ahead for a while, but then I think he starts going into more things that she should do, what I would call in her secular temporal world. But this has been the real spiritual instruction he's been giving her in these last few paragraphs. And they're quite lovely. And I think, if I can memorize it, it would be sort of what I would say to new people who come to my meeting. This is sort of the sum of the teachings, follow this and you'll do okay.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, I will move us along. This is a longish paragraph. Perhaps somebody would just like to read until they feel like they've read enough. Might I prevail upon you, Pat or John?
Was that addressed to me?
Yes, maybe I was muted. I was saying that since this is a long paragraph, perhaps someone could read till they feel like they've read enough.
I think I've had enough to digest.
What do you say? Would you like to read some more, or have we done enough?
I'd be willing to read that or some of that paragraph.
Thank you, ma'am.
Oh, Abigail, believe my words. They are the words of God and truth. Be not wanton, but sober-minded in thy youth, and wait on the Lord within. Hearken unto him. God is light immortal, life immortal, truth immortal, an everlasting eternal spirit. He speaks spiritually and invisibly within the hearts and consciences of men and women. Hear what he speaks and obey his voice, and thy soul shall live. Fear to offend him or sin against him, for the wages of sin is death. Therefore prize his love in thy young and tender years, and do thou read the scriptures and friends' books, and take heed unto what thou readest, to obey it, as far as thou understandest. And pray often unto the Lord that he will give thee his knowledge, and open thy understanding in the things of his kingdom. Search thy heart often with the light of Christ in thee. Manifest and bring thy deeds to it, that they may be tried. And examine thyself how the case stands betwixt the Lord and thee. And if thou seest thyself wrong, humble thyself and be sorry, and turn unto him, and he will show thee mercy. And take heed for the time to come that thou run not into the same evil again. Keep thy heart clean. Watch against the evil in thyself, in that which shows it. Therein there is power, and thereby thou hast power to overcome all evil. I guess it goes on a little longer. And dear child, mind not the pleasures of sin, which are but for a moment, and the end is misery. But keep under and cross thy will and affection. So thy mind will have no pleasure in the evil, but in good. And thou wilt feel the immortal seed springing up in thee, which God's peace and love is too.
Thank you.
This feels like such good medicine to me. Howgill is talking to me and reminding me that there is always a contest in my heart between what is easy and what is difficult, what is likely to please other people, and what is likely to please the Lord. What is likely to make me look good to others, and what is likely to direct my attention back to the inner work of watching what goes through my heart and seeing what is toward the good and what is towards temptation. The temptation to please people, the temptation to have things easy, the temptation not to ask more of myself.
I'm reminded of the words that are in the Lord's Prayer, where Jesus is teaching his disciples, and he says, "And lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from evil." And that's sort of what Howgill is saying here in the second part of that paragraph we just read, the longer one.
Well, he's talking to a young person, and a young person he knows is not likely to know God. There just hasn't been enough time. And he knows his daughter, and though he loves her, he realizes that she does not know Christ or God yet. And it's a very precarious position that she and anyone else is in who knows only the self-centeredness. Christ and God just can't be imagined. I mean, one can try to imagine them and think one can imagine them, but that imagination is simply an image. It's not the real being. And in that precarious position, there's only the temptation that promises some quick pleasure, some end, some goal to be had that one knows what one can get if one goes through certain actions. But to move from that position of ignorance, of not knowing God and Christ, into knowing God and Christ, is unusual. And that's why there had been an apostasy between the primitive Christians and the early Friends, an apostasy for 1600 years that they referred to often. And there's been an apostasy since then. So it's unusual. And he's trying to shore up the activity that will allow her to come into that knowledge. But what they knew allowed people to come into that knowledge was by hearing the word of God. That is the Spirit of God spoken. And that's what the ministers were there. That was their primary function, was to receive the Spirit within and then speak from it. And that is what allowed people to get over that hurdle from ignorance and knowing nothing but temptation and refusing temptation, those two things. But once they came into the knowledge of God, they knew that they had a power and a incentive to resist temptation. They knew the goodness on the other side of it. So they were not liked because they were speaking to people who were trying to make things as good for themselves as they could, which among the religious atmosphere of the time meant that people convinced themselves that they already were in good standing with God. And that's why the early Friends were hated and persecuted, because they knew that this was a self-delusion that was preventing them from truly coming into that knowledge of God. And it was in love to people that they pointed this out, that there was a self-delusion going on. And of course, the people didn't want to hear that. But as John said, they weren't thinking about saying things that other people would congratulate them for. What they were saying was what they were required to say as people who had realized that it was no longer they that lived, but Christ lived in them. So we see in this letter the utmost natural love of a parent for a child. And that makes it tender. But they also loved the people who were not their natural children. And they loved them because they loved God and they wanted God's will to cover the earth.
Thank you, Pat. I think we will, that might be a good time to stop for this evening, but we can certainly come back to this paragraph, these two paragraphs, in 2 weeks.
And we'll be back on our regular time next time, right? This is just a one-off because I have my doctor's appointment.
Yes, good luck with that.